Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're going to present our new report, Impacts and Insight Navigating the Sustainable IT Revolution. The report helps IT buyers avoid greenwash and false claims. I'm Cassandra Julin, PR and Communication Manager here at TCO Development, and I will guide you through this webinar today. With me, I have our experts. So we have Claire Hubby, Director Purchasing Engagement Global, and she will be presenting the key findings of the report. We have Gabriella Mellstrand, Global Marketing and Communication Director, and Gabriella has been the project lead for this report, so she'll be able to give some insights into what's behind all of this and why we're doing what we're doing. And we have Stephen Fuller, Senior Criteria Manager, and Stephen will be able to answer some of your questions more in depth, going into the details of the report content. So we hope this is a thrilling agenda for you, and we're very happy that you have joined us today. Let me go through quickly as well. You have a chat box or the question box. And in the question box, you can type your questions, and we're going to address as many of them as possible at the end when we will have Claire, Gabriella, and Stephen in a panel. So please use it and write your questions as they come along, and we will try to bring as many of them up as possible. Afterwards, this webinar will be available on demand, so don't worry if you miss some bits or want to go through it again or share it with your colleagues. We will send it to you about a week after this broadcast. So let me introduce who we are as TCO certified. So if we go to the next slide, please. Yes, we've been around for about 30 years. We are a global sustainability certification for IT products. Our mission is to drive industry in a more sustainable direction. So that means every 3 years we update our criteria to always be at the forefront and edge at what we do. The core of what we do lies on independent verification, and you're going to learn a lot more about that today, but that's really what makes TCO certified so impactful. More than 3,500 products are today certified across the product categories. So that means there's a wide variety of products to choose from. But that is mainly because purchasers are asking for certified products. So we like to thank you for that, and thank you for helping us to do the work that we do and stand behind our criteria. So let's not talk so much about the basics about us. We're here to talk about the content of the report. So let's start with Gabriella, who has been kind of the spider in the net for this report. Gabriella, why are we doing this Impacts and Insights series? What's behind all of this?
We start there. Okay, so we have done this for some years now. We make an annual report to show the sustainability in the IT industry and what you can do to drive change. You said something about that, but what's behind the change? And also we connect that to our certification and trying to show you some insights behind TCO certified, but also give you the tools available in different ways. So each year we're trying to deep dive in a subject, and this year's subject you probably already know if you have downloaded the report, but it's about independent verification.
And you were into independent verification and the theme of this report, but what do you think is so unique here? What's special about this year's report?
Well, as I said, we zoom into the independent verification and why it's important for purchases and organizations that want to make a difference. So if you want to make a difference when you're buying something, it affects a lot of things globally, many times. And you need to understand what tools are available for you so you can show the real impact of what you do. And that's what we're trying to show with this report. So you can get some keys that are important for your work, and so you can avoid greenwash and false claims.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really the essence of what we're trying to do. So thank you for bringing that clarity out. So who is this report for? Who needs to read this report, in your opinion?
Mm, it's mainly made for organizations that are purchasing organizations of IT products, but it's also aimed for those who want to use an eco-label or a certification as a tool and understand how you can do it. It doesn't matter really what kind of product category you are interested in. You can use our keys that we give in this report for any product category, but the examples that we give are in the IT industry and how it works there. But you, as I said, you can use it for sustainable purchasing all over the world.
Hmm. Fully agree. And when you say purchasing organizations, I mean, it's a word that perhaps, I don't know, it's not super clear, but I mean, for me anyway, what I read into this is most organizations today have IT products within their organizations. Very few are working without laptops, headsets, like we are doing now, screens, monitors, and so on. IT is, in most organizations, a very fundamental part. And that's why I think this report is so important, because I think it's really attractive to everyone who is affected by this. But without further ado, we're going to have a chance to ask you more questions in the panel in a little bit. But let's give Claire a chance to go through the report and explain what this is all about. So Claire, I leave the floor to you now.
Thanks, Cassandra. Thanks, Gabriella. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to join you today. Let's get down to business, and I'm really excited to walk you through some of the background to our findings here, give you some tools you can use when it comes to avoiding greenwash. And we've already mentioned independent verification, and let's just start with that. Greenwash is still with us. And with sustainability having such a moment, we're seeing more greenwash than ever before. And why is there so much greenwash? Well, greenwash is easy. Doing the verification is hard. So we want to let you in a little bit to some behind the scenes views on why verification looks like it does, why it's so important, why it's hard work, and some tools you can use to get it done without yourselves having to spend the time, energy, and resources doing this very difficult task. Next slide. So clearly the IT category comes with a bunch of different sustainability risks, both on the environmental side, on the supply chain side, social aspects as well. And if we back up for a little bit, I'm sure most of us who buy and use IT equipment in our organizations, we're thinking, how can I manage the category more sustainably? How can we save energy? How can we reduce emissions? But what we're forgetting here is that somewhere between 70 and 80% of your sustainability impact with that computer or that electronic device happens in the supply chain before it even ends up on your desk. The problem with this is there's some brand new research out this week from Procurious that says that only somewhere in the realm of 2/3 of organizations are even putting their procurement requests into the supply chain. So we've got a bulk of the risk in the supply chain, but way too few procurement voices being heard to drive change in the supply chain. So this is clearly a problem. And if we look at what those problems are, we're talking working conditions on the factory floor, raw materials extraction, enormous social and environmental risks in that space, chemicals, both used in the products themselves, but also in manufacturing processes. In things like final assembly, we've got cleaners and solvents being used in those processes as well. Incredibly complex processes, but that happen to be very hidden from procurement. If you think about your purchasing teams or your procurement processes, they're not able to access and get insights into what's actually happening on the factory floor. How can you possibly get access to raw materials extraction without creating a very dedicated team doing just that? So here we begin to see the reasons why greenwash is still so prevalent, and blue wash as well, which is false social claims or claims of social responsibility. And that's really what we wanted to explore further in our report this year. So clearly, independent proof is the answer to avoiding false claims in procurement. And this really doesn't matter what category we're talking about. Today we're talking about IT, but these rules really apply to any number of categories you might be buying. I usually say whether it's t-shirts or tech, the same rules apply. And I think it's really interesting to look at some recent statistics by the International Consumer Protection Enforcement Network did a study of online environmental claims, and they found as much as 40% of online claims around environmental attributes were false or misleading. And here's the problem. You as purchasers, as procurement teams, are expected to rely on those claims when you're buying any number of products, and IT is no exception. So many purchasers that we talk to every day rely very heavily on what industry declares to them or what product data sheets tell them. And I'm not saying that all of that information is false. Some of it is absolutely correct, but we know that some of it is not. We know that there are loopholes, there are shortcuts in this very complex supply chain. A couple of examples that we see quite frequently in the verification the work that we do. If we take a look at working hours in the factories, for example, we've seen several instances where a factory will declare that they have a maximum 60-hour working week, which is good practice and it's part of our criteria. But when we go in and verify what's actually happening on the factory floor, those working hours are 80 or even higher. Batteries is another example, and I know this is a very hot topic for IT managers. How long are these products going to last? We've seen products with battery life cycles declared of several hundred cycles of battery charge that should tell you something about the usable life of that product. And when we go in and test that battery, the actual battery life comes out to about half. So not only is that troublesome when it comes to what you can contribute to your organization's sustainability goals, think about the bottom line. You can plan your product use based on what you have as a declaration, or do you want better proof and better verification to help you plan that life cycle more efficiently? So purchasers on the whole are starting to understand these challenges more and more, and understanding that they need to go deeper. They need to go beyond the factors that we think about on the desktop. We need to raise our voices and take action into the supply chain and get proof on what's happening. So obviously a great tool that people love to use are eco labels and certifications, and we can vouch for that too, being a certification. But we also hear that there is a problem of eco label overload, and as I'm sure many of you know, it's a confusing space. There are literally hundreds of eco labels out there in any number of product categories, and it's important to know that not all eco labels are made the same. You need to be very smart when choosing an eco label. And I think there's three, before I go into three myths that I think we need to bust, just think about if you're being asked to rely on declarations, well, you need to know that some eco labels rely on those declarations as well. Just because it's an eco label does not mean that the verification is automatically included. So you need to get smart about what questions you're asking yourselves and the eco labels that you're considering using. So not only is the independent verification not automatically included, think also about the criteria. Is the eco label you're considering covering not only environmental aspects, but social responsibility aspects, such as in the manufacturing phase? Are they looking at the supply chain aspects as well as life cycle aspects when you receive the product. These are all critically important tools that can help you sort the wheat from the chaff, or the serious and the not so serious eco labels when you're faced with that choice. And you also want to make sure that any eco label you choose has a system of accountability, and they don't all have this. Some eco labels include good criteria, but they don't go through and verify and implement and hold industry accountable for compliance. So don't assume that an eco label helps you get over the greenwash. You may in fact be perpetuating the greenwash if you don't make the right choice. Next slide. A couple of examples I just wanted to talk about today that happen to be processes that we're working with, but I think serve as an illustration for how the importance of verification can not only lower your risk, raise your impact, but it can also encourage this continuous improvement that is so important in any sustainability strategy. We often say to buyers, okay, if you're getting started with sustainable IT procurement, don't expect a clean supply chain immediately, and don't expect change overnight. This is a long-term commitment to continuous improvement, and this is where the verification and the accountability is just so important. So 2 hot topics. Let's take chemicals and let's take factory working conditions. If we take chemicals and we think about chemicals in IT products, but also in the factory environment, so product chemicals and what we call process chemicals. The problem with chemicals is that there's literally hundreds of thousands of them in use today, and the number available on the market is expected to double by 2030. So it's a massive issue. We're still in the situation, however, where only about 1% of all chemicals in commercial use today are tested for any kind of human health and environmental hazard. That's an amazing statistic, I think, and it gives you an idea of the scope of the potential risk we're dealing with here. And we can think, well, there's legislation such as ROS or other laws that should be giving us better tools for chemical management. Sadly, legislation moves quite slowly, and the focus has been on banning the worst chemicals, which of course is important. The problem is we don't know enough about what's replacing those banned chemicals. And particularly in IT, we have issues of flame retardants, we have plasticizers in cables that give them that flex that we need. We need to drive safer substitutions and make those available to everybody. So what we've done is we've set up something called the Accepted Substance List, which you may have seen on our website. And what's different about this approach, this accepted substance approach, is that we're going in and third-party verifying and doing assessments on chemicals and benchmarking those, putting them on a public list so they are identified as safer alternatives to the banned chemicals. Now, this list is publicly available. It's not proprietary. It's available to everyone in the IT industry and even other industries that would care to make safer choices. The idea here is the independent verification drives those safer alternatives and makes them the mainstream choice. So the verification is lowering your risk, but it's also driving better business. If we take a step over to the factory floor and think about how do we go in and do verification in the factories? Well, this is work we've been doing for quite a long time now, and we've taken this accepted list approach even to the final assembly factories that manufacture TCO certified products. And what's interesting about this is that we've been able to use this structure of a risk-based approach to drive business to the more sustainable factories. And how we do that is that each final assembly factory, and there are, I think, 79 on our list right now, each is assigned a risk category, which determines how often your factory is monitored, audited, and followed up. So obviously, the more work you do, the more compliant you are with the criteria, the less monitoring and follow-up you're subjected to. And that also makes for really good business. And in the report, you'll be able to see an example of one of our independent verification teams that went into a factory, one of many factories and many audits that are done in any year. And it's interesting just to see the work that goes into doing this verification. And clearly this is not something that as a purchaser you're able to do yourself. It takes access, it takes expertise, and it takes a lot of experience to really know what to look for. Some issues in factories are rather obvious. If an exit is blocked, for example, or if there's not adequate PPE for certain processes in manufacturing. Other things take a little digging. So, for example, we'll find things like excessive overtime, for example, or loading docks, unloading areas, how are those set up for worker safety? So having that worker impact is incredibly important, and that's something that only good verification can do. We sometimes hear that, well, we ask our vendors to have a code of conduct. That's good, right? And yes, it is, but let's be clear, a code of conduct is only a starting point for the work to begin. A code of conduct is your base camp for going in and measuring what's going on and assessing what the practices that are actually happening on the factory floor. And what we do, we take it further so that once the audit is done, a corrective action plan is set up, but then we go in and set deadlines for those corrective actions to take place, and we're able to follow up and hold industry accountable for getting that work done. And by doing that, we can employ consequences, which could be as strict as withdrawing a certificate, or it could be reassigning your risk category as a factory. So again, verification makes sure that workers are taken care of. And what this boils down to is we spend, just in our organization through our verification partners, 20,000 hours a year doing this work through product testing, factory audit work, follow-ups, continued monitoring of factories, but we also engage with the brand owners themselves. And there's a lot of good work going on in the IT industry, and there's also some practices where we need to see greater efforts as well. So it's really across the board, and that's why this constant engagement is so important to really move this continuous improvement forward. It takes a lot of hours and it's hard work, but it's so critical for your credibility and for being able to measure your progress. For you as a purchaser, what this means is that you get independent proof. You get a certificate that says, this is the work that's been done and it's been verified to have taken place. So there's a lot to unpack here, but I would like to conclude with just a tool that you can use whenever you're looking at an eco label or a certification. Doesn't matter what the product category is. Today we've talked about IT, but look at your office supplies, look at your food service ware, look at your cleaning products. All of these products, you can use these tools to assess what a good eco label can potentially do for you. And we've got 3 questions to ask. The first one is, make sure that your eco-label has a broad set of up-to-date criteria that cover both environmental and supply chain responsibility. You must have both. Remember, we've got all that impact locked into the supply chain. You need a tool that can get in there and do the work for you. The second question is this independent verification. Does the eco-label include independent verification every time? Not just optionally, but it has to be mandatory for every product so you can be confident what you're buying always has verification backing it up. The third one is this accountability that we talked about. How does your eco-label hold industry accountable? And what does that actually look like? Ask the sticky questions, ask for case studies, and ask how that accountability is actually enforced. So, in summary, a good eco-label or certification holds industry accountable. Your job as a purchaser is to hold your eco labels and your certifications accountable for what they promise to deliver. So thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy reading the report. We're delighted to ask any questions and share our learnings with you at any time. So thanks, Cassandra. Back to you.
Thank you, Claire, for this summary of the report. I'm sure there are a lot of questions based on Claire's presentation just now. So fire them away in the questions box and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. And while I'll welcome also Gabriella and Steve back to the stage, Claire, why don't we start with a question for you? You were saying that, you know, eco labels can in fact be contributing to greenwash if they're self-declarations or if they're, you know, so they could be part of the problems. But isn't it better to do something than to do nothing? Isn't a declaration better than, you know, not doing anything at all?
You know, it can be. It can be. If nothing else, a declaration helps illuminate what questions you need to be asking. A declaration is not a solution, but it can be a place to start. Then you know what questions you need to be asking when you want to take that next step and use a really good eco label. So it helps you know which issues you need to dive into. So make that start, but know which questions to ask.
And those questions are obviously part of the report if you need some help or support with that getting started. We got some questions already, and one of them is relating the slides. So as mentioned in the beginning, the full webinar will be available on demand in about a week's time. So you'll be able to have a look again and check if there's anything you wanted to get back on. Steve, we're really glad to have you as a kind of in-depth expert on this subject matter. Why is social responsibility in the manufacturing phase so important? I mean, what is it all about? You obviously work with this on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So there's a short answer and there's a long answer. So I'll take the long answer on this one.
Great.
I think to be considered as a serious certification worker with sustainability, it's critical for social criteria, you know, to set social criteria that are equally as tough and driving as those criteria that are focused on the environmental issues. The problem is getting to that point and in a credible way and driving the improvements. So there's a lot to learn that's written on environmental impact, you know, of the production when it comes to environmental life cycle assessments that are in circulation. It's easier to associate the impact caused by our IT consumption on exhausting natural resources and the degradation that it leaves behind. You know, about the global warming emissions from the manufacturing and the chemical exposure and the toxic wastewaters. And of course, you know, the ever-growing amount of the lost resource called e-waste. But we often don't stop to consider the social situation that's allowing this high level of unsustainable production and consumerism to be possible, and don't always understand the negative impact it's having on the workers within these supply chains. So we've gone in a short time from buying products that were expensive and valuable, so much so that we were prepared to rent, repair, and upgrade them, to now being able to buy complex devices that are so cheap that we replace them almost once the warranty has run out. So electronic devices are cheap and replaceable for the reason that their supply chains are full of cheap labor situated in countries that relax or ignore the enforcement of labor laws in order to stimulate business. So we're not paying the true value of man hours and the resources gone into making these products, but it's the workers that are the ones that are paying the high price in order to keep these devices cheap. So if we continue down this road of higher rates of productivity, it will only lead to an increase in the social issues we're seeing today. These are issues that perpetuate situations such as child and forced labor. And this is why it's important to work with socially responsible manufacturing if we want to also achieve that circular transition. So there is a win-win here that can be achieved for both workers and companies, but it demands that companies, it demands them to invest both time and resources in social responsible manufacturing. So companies have they are having a growing awareness of their environmental responsibilities, but they also must develop their social engagement, in supporting their suppliers. So as with environmental action, being social responsible can also boost a company's image and their brand when they invest their time and their resources towards improving their supply chains. So this investment in workers, the workers' well-being, will also help boost the employee engagement and morale, and it will lead to eventually healthier, safer working environments, improved productivity, and this is where certification has an important role to not only drive that engagement and to share those best practices with the organizations, but to also independently verify that an organization's commitment to social improvement is substantial and is based on fact.
I want to go back as well on what you say, paying the true value. Now, a lot of people would argue that this is actually the responsibility of the brands and not the purchasers. Claire, do you want to comment on that? And like from a risk perspective, I know you and I quite often talk about the risk.
Yeah, I mean, I always love listening to Steve because he just has all the detail that I think is just so it's just so important that we know facts from the ground. And I think the real value is look at the risk that procurement runs if you don't either get into the supply chain and do this kind of work yourself or rely on a tool that does it for you. Then that risk, all of that risk and all of those unknowns are just deferred straight onto you as the buying organization and to your brand. So, and we talked earlier about declarations, Cassandra, and I think this is really the key. If you are prepared to just rely on criteria alone without it being backed up with the work in the supply chain, then you're not sure what you're getting, and you're taking an enormous risk by staking a claim on that.
I think we have a question here that fits really nicely into the topic as well, Claire. So the question reads that there are a lot of eco labels out there today, and how do I choose? Like, is there a comparison of them? How do I know which ones to trust? I mean, obviously that's what the whole report is about, but if you are a purchaser, is there like a quick answer or like a solution for them, or is there like a go-to guide for dummies on eco labels?
Eco labels for dummies. Wow, I think if someone could write that book, they'd be a very wealthy person. Comparing eco labels is really quite difficult. There's a number of places you can go to. I mean, some people refer to the Global Eco Labeling Network members. Those are reputable type 1 eco labels. You want to look for those multi-attribute labels, right? There are a lot of single attribute labels out there that just deal with one piece of the puzzle, but it's really important to get that broad scope. So make sure that you're getting that criteria scope that we talked about. But again, I think go to the 3 questions we talked about. Just think about the criteria scope, the verification, and the accountability. They have to be there in combination. So that's the best advice I can give.
That's great, Claire. Thank you for that. Gabriella, please jump in.
Yeah, and I also want to answer that question. So when you read the report, as we said, we won't compare different eco labels or certifications, and we want to give you the keys. And also, we can't do that as an organization. That's not our work that we do. We trying to drive the industry in a more sustainable direction, but that's our tools we know about. We can't say how other eco labels works, and this report doesn't show other ones, but it shows the tools you need to find that out, what's a credible eco label is or a certification.
Thank you for that clarification. So jumping the topics a little bit, but I have a really interesting question here. And again, it's for you, Steve. What's the story about the TCO Certified Accepted Substance List, and what's the impact of it? Like, why is it so important, and why is it something that we as an organization have been so passionate about?
Yeah, it's a great story. You know, for many years we restricted halogenated flame retardants from certified products, and at the same time, as part of that verification process, we also gathered information about the type of alternatives that were being used by industry. So it wasn't just a you know, a restriction list that we were setting up. It was also, what alternatives are you using? And this is where we started to gather information about you know, the replacements that were happening to restricted substance lists. If we look at the ROS directed off the candidate list, you know, ROS has very few flame retardants, halogenated flame retardants, a candidate list, you know, a few more, 200 or so, when it comes to you know, the restriction of or the awareness of hazardous chemicals. You know, for that, they're not actually restricted on candidate lists, but they are. You should be aware that these are, you know, recognized as hazardous. So very few chemicals actually restricted. And the alternatives that were being used, we saw, were equally hazardous, or there was very little information to make a hazard assessment on them. So they were potentially equally as hazardous as the ones that were, you know, going to replace. So this we saw was not a sustainable situation, you know, of restricting one chemical only for it to be replaced by an equally hazardous or potentially equally hazardous one. So the story started when we finally found a framework, a hazard assessment framework. We call, you know, it's green screen that we use, that we saw was substantial enough to make a really good in-depth assessment on a chemical, and to grade that chemical on its environmental and human health impact. But not only that, it goes further to see if this chemical ends up in nature, what happens then? Does it convert? Does it perpetuate? You know, bioaccumulate? Is it persistent in nature? Does it convert into an equally more or hazardous chemical? So this is a very comprehensive system of independently verifying a chemical on its hazardous risk, and it covers 18 endpoints of hazard, both environmental and human health. And we saw that yeah, there was a selection of safer alternatives, not all of them. We saw 35 to 40 flame retardants that we'd identified as alternatives. And you know, we had a start list when in 2015, when we first started the list, a selection of 10 possible safer alternatives. The problem was that, you know, some of the industry were using them, but not all of the industry were using them. And this is where the idea of making this list public came about, that we wanted to share this information and speed up that transition towards using safer alternatives. Now today, the list has almost got a life of its own, that chemical suppliers are seeing the possibility that the benefits of adding their chemical to the list, getting it independently assessed and adding it to the list as, you know, business incentive. And brand owners, you know, that own the products are seeing the benefits of getting that information into the design phase of the product. So it's not becoming a reactive situation anymore about, oh, well, this chemical is now restricted, it's in our product, we have to recall the products all of a sudden. This actually gets that information into the design of the product, so that that risk of recalling products is minimal now. So this is a benefit that we're seeing, and now when we're expanding in for TCO Certified Generation 9 into printed circuit boards and the flame retardants that are used there. We're seeing that list continue to expand now. I thought we had a very good selection when we reached 15 flame retardants. independently assessed risk flame retardants. But now we've told industry that we are now going to focus also on printed circuit boards. I've seen in the last few months that list has now increased to, I think I'm about to add another flame retardant to the list. So we'll be up in 21 safer alternative flame retardants. So this is a really positive development around the list.
Thank you for that clarification. I think another argument that we talk about as well is not only the hazards to human health that you are mentioning now, but if you know what's in a product, then you can also better look after those materials once the product has used its kind of end of life. So when it comes to recycling and that stage, so there's definitely only benefits of knowing what's in your products to a greater extent. We keep questions rolling in. That's great. Keep writing them. We're going to try to answer as many of them as possible. Claire, I want to check in with you again. What's the most important message for purchasers in this report? I mean, we touched upon the 3 questions. We kind of touched upon the verification, but where do you see, like, for a purchaser, what would you say is a must walk away with after having read this report?
I think the big takeaway for purchasers right now is to raise your voice in the supply chain. We really need to get more purchaser voices, more solicitations and policies that address supply chain aspects of the products that you source. It's really lacking right now. A lot of purchasers are measuring energy consumption or amount of recycled content, which is all very, very valid, but we need to step it up and get your procurements talking about supply chain responsibility as well. That's where the bulk of your impact is. If we're talking about carbon and emissions, 80% of the life cycle emissions of a computer are in the supply chain. This is where procurement needs to act.
And Gabriella, from your perspective, what is this report trying to solve? Like, what's I mean, Claire was talking about the kind of key takeaways for a procurer. What did you try to solve, and how does it match?
There are many different things we're trying to solve with this report. But one thing that came up now also when we speak is that many times purchasers focus on the criteria they want to set, and they want to have some kind of sustainability criteria, and maybe sometimes they forget about the supply chain and so on. But what we are trying to solve with our report is to show, don't forget the independent verification and the follow-up, because if you don't know what you're asking for, then you don't have the impact that you maybe think you have by buying certain things or ask for certain things. So you need to have the independent verification and the follow-up. And we're trying to show how it works in an easy way, even if it's hard, because there are so many different levels that you need to know about. But we're trying to deep dive in some spots that we think could be important for you to get the full picture.
And a follow-up question here for you, Steve. So what does all of this independent verification, we mentioned in the report the 20,000 hours, what does that mean in practice? I mean, what is that really about?
Yeah, so I think, so the intention on that part of the report is to give the reader the understanding of the level of that independent verification that's behind the hundreds of certified models purchasers can find on our online product finder. So and this we've estimated adds up to 20,000 per year, in compliance to make sure that the claims specifically connected to the certified products, are the correct ones that are being made. So this verification, it covers like product testing, the independent verifier, on the test labs that we demand are accredited to ISO 17025, and this is for quality reasons and repeatability reasons. But we also put a lot of time and effort into checking up that repeatability between the test labs, so that it doesn't matter which test lab you go to, you will not get an easier ride through one test lab compared to another. The factory audits, of course, carried out by the independent audit firms, in accordance to RBA and S8000, those kind of standards. These auditors also have to have, qualifications and expertise when it comes to doing these audits. And this is why we also limit that type of audit that we accept, between RBA VAP audits and S8000 audits, so that we can maintain that quality. And these are systems that have an independent verification process behind them. And also we do this, annually. It's the meetings between the brand owners and the verification partners, or the brand owners and ourselves, to discuss their level of commitment, not just issues around the code of conduct and how they communicate it, but how they go further than just doing audits, how they are committed to supporting, and how we can help sort of like share those best practices with the brand owners, so that they can also develop and understand where they are falling behind, perhaps with their competitors. So these are all important issues that go into those hours. I can say that I think that 20,000 falls short of my estimate anyway. Some might think that, as a certification, TCO is just 20 plus so employees, but really we're a whole network of verification partners, globally, there, that we work very closely with to maintain that quality level and that verification process. So we're much bigger than just these 20 or so employees that you'll find in Stockholm. We're much bigger than that, and it takes a lot of work and effort to keep that quality up.
And what I want to have a follow-up question there. I mean, independent is obviously a key when it comes to the verification. Why is the independent part such a key to make it not greenwash and not fall into the false claims categories? I open up that question. Who wants to jump on it? I think you're all capable of answering it. Gabriella, you seem you seem hungry for it.
This one. I don't care. No, but there are. Why it's important? I think I said it before, because you want to make a change most of the times with the things you buy. That's why you set this criteria that you also many times put a lot of works with. It's included in TCO Certified, of course. But again, if you don't follow up, if you don't have an independent verification that somebody else actually tells you how the criteria comply with things that you buy, then you don't know for sure. And many times you can fall for the greenwash that we want to show you the risk with and what can happen to your organization when you think actually that you make a sustainable impact and you're not. So that's why it's important with independent verification and the follow-up process and the system behind some eco labels and some that don't have it. So you don't think it's included in all eco labels that you use. That you really need to know what's behind the eco label and the system behind it.
Thank you for that clarification. I have a question here that I think is for Claire. It's about the 3 questions that we have in the report. What about social responsible manufacturing? Are they applicable there as well in that area?
Sorry, could you clarify the question, Cassandra?
No, the question is mentioning that, social sustainability or socially responsible manufacturing is more of a black hole rather than the kind of criteria related directly to the product. So the question is the 3 questions in the report, the kind of 3 questions that ask behind a good eco label, are they applicable also to the social side?
Most definitely. I think if we look at that first question, is to start with your criteria scope. We want to make sure that the environmental piece is there, but the supply chain social piece has to be there as well. And then following on from that whole criteria scope, you want to make sure that everything is verified and that based on that verification, there's accountability built into the system. So absolutely, and this is the whole reason we're talking about verification today, is because so many of these aspects are hidden from view and hidden from access for the vast majority of purchasers. So find the tools that go in there and do that work for you so you don't have to.
Very good. All right, time is starting to run out on us, but before closing down this webinar, I want to go around the panel and see what's your key takeaway in one sentence from this report. So starting with you, Steve. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
I'll
We'll
take the
start with
easy
you,
one.
Gabriella.
Independent verification.
Independent verification. Thank you. And Gabriella.
Yeah, I would say independent verification, of course, but this should be mandatory for all criteria.
Yeah. Very good. And what about you, Claire?
I would say this is hard work, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. There are organizations out there who are well equipped and are already doing this work for you. What you have to do is raise your voice, ask for those certifications specifically in your procurement, because that's when the work gets going. That's the process you set in motion.
Independent
that was probably
verification.
3 sentences though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So I'm taking away independent verification, mandatory for all criteria. And Claire, you were finishing also on the, sorry, I lost the, can you repeat yours again?
You can do it, but find the tools that will do it for you.
Find the tools that work for you. And also then I think I can add, as an organization, what risk are you willing to take? I mean, what's your stance on this? Of course, you don't have to care about this, but if you care and if you think that there is a risk in this, there are things you can do and you can get started. So we got also in the questions box a lot of comments to our speakers. So thank you for joining. You've done a great job, says the audience. As mentioned before, it will be available on demand about a week after. We have a purchaser engagement team that Claire is leading, ready to talk to you. They're spread across the globe, so you'll find one relevant for your market or your area that you can reach out to. We have upcoming webinars as well, so make sure you register for our newsletter to stay up to date and always receive the latest invitations. We will do another webinar on the report. If you've read it and downloaded it, you know that we have a lot of experts that have spoken on it, and we base a lot of the information on the interviews. So we're going to gather a bunch of them in our next webinar and give you the chance to talk to them through our next event. So stay tuned for that. Also, please, if you haven't done so, download the report. It will be available to you via link in the follow-up email. So make sure you have a look if you are curious to know more. So without further ado, huge thanks to the panel and to the listeners, and I wish you all a nice rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.